Well, hi, here I am to help you out with getting started on this essay. What you've done before is really relevant for what you're now doing. So what you did before with your Rose for Emily essay was, of course, construct an argument based on comparison and contrast, use evidence, especially textual evidence from the story, document, using MLA format. So what are you doing now that's different? You have the choice. You pick the story, but don't pick one that's over short, and don't pick one that is, for you anyway, maybe overly complicated. Pick a story that appeals to you, and you especially have a strong conviction about some facet of that story. So you get to pick the story, you get to pick the argument, just make the argument. Remember, what's the best argument for audience for argument? That skeptical audience that you imagine that you have to convince. You have to offer evidence, you have to offer reasoning, you have to look at the options. And in this case, remember, you can do secondary research, meaning that you can research further and add that research, literary criticism, or any valid form of research. We're not talking about Dan's online blog or some Cliff Notes type of research, but legitimate research into the literary criticism about the story, and you can bring that to bear on the story if you want to. You do not have to do that, but you certainly may do that if you want to do that. All right, so you have the key dates. I'm going to just demonstrate to you how to do this. Pick a story. So you've read through stories, let's say in 8, stories for further reading. You've looked back at some of your other stories, and you decided, I am going to pick this story. I'm going to pick Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm just using that as an example. So I picked that story, and I decided to generate some thesis statements about that. Now that can be based on virtually any argument that is credible that I can make about the story. So I can certainly integrate literary elements if I want to. Remember, we've studied those. So let's pick theme. All right. Hey, good idea. Let's pick theme. So I decide I'm going to pick theme for an element that I want to wage an argument about. Perhaps after reading the story, I've come up with this idea. Aha, I can see the light bulb there, right? I can wage an argument about the theme of Young Goodman Brown. And it seems to me that young Goodman perhaps overly idealized the townspeople, and especially Faith, initially, and maybe that's a pitfall. Maybe if we overly idealize those who are around us, then when we see that they have failings, we become overly apt to vilify them. That is, to find the evil in them. So this separation between good and evil and magnifying the good in another human being perhaps leads us to overly magnify the evil if we see flaws in them, right? I don't know for sure, but I can pursue that argument. Now, I'm going to set up the argument. I'm going to find evidence from the story. I'm going to wage my argument. And maybe in this case, I look up a credible source about the Puritan theology, the Puritan frame of mind, and bring that into the story, and by so doing, enrich the paper even further. So you'll have example papers, but really that's how it works. You can run by me any provisional thesis statements that you'd like to try out and see how they fly, and you can do that way. All right, so now I'm looking at the possibility of expanding my paper and my content by adding some form of literary criticism. That is, not somebody's blog or not somebody's paper for sale or a piece of a poorly written essay on the topic, but rather in this case a lecture by a scholar that has to do with the very theme that I was expounding upon and arguing for. I was defending my choice of theme, right? Through argument and through evidence. So look at this. This little bit I can quote and insert into my essay and add some credibility and, yes, add some meaningful content to the essay. So there we have this quotation, according to this authority. And remember, this is somebody else's opinion. I don't have to agree with it. I might take it on. I might disagree with it. It doesn't mean that it is unassailable because it is in print, in this case online. The story's climactic Witches' Sabbath, where Salemites await the initiation of Goodman Brown and his faith into evil, is an analog of the Salem witchcraft frenzy, right? So dramatically illustrated in The Crucible, the play The Crucible. The entire story dramatizes the either-or mentality. There I have my theme. The either-or, either is good or evil, which underlay the Puritans' persecution of the Quakers and other non-believers and events at Gallows Hill. A very dark spot on our history. But it must also be read as a journey into the dark inner reaches of the self. So now that even adds another possibility of reading the story symbolically and in terms of an allegorical understanding of the journey into that inner self, that is Goodman Brown's inner self, and what exists perhaps within the darker recesses of ourselves. All right, enough said, but you get the idea. I can actually incorporate that into my argument.